Oh, it's going live. Hey, we're live here. Yeah, it would kill it. Hey guys, I am here in my garage in Superior, Colorado. We get to do a live in-person one. Dr. Antonio Gurul, is that how you say your name? Goulet.
It's good.
Where's that from?
So it's actually Hispanic,
Okay.
But originally French.
Okay. Yeah, that was gonna Goulet.
Yeah. So a lot of people from like Canada and up north, they'll catch it, and every now and then someone will catch French originally, but Hispanic.
Nice. And yeah, so we connected here. We were actually on my last guest. My very last episode was Ryan DeBell, Dr. Ryan DeBell, the Movement Fix, and we were in one of his webinars. And he's like, hey, say where you're from. And I'm like, I'm in Superior. And he's like, hey, I'm like, oh my God, what's happening? So yeah, so we're here in person. We connected. We share a lot of things in common, it seems. And for those of you tuning in, I did shave my face. So that's a big announcement there. The beard's been there. It's very cold with no facial hair. Anyway, that'll change in a few days. So we connected. He has his practice here with his wife, and your wife is also a chiropractor, and she focuses on pre and postnatal care. Yeah.
Pre, postnatal, and pediatric.
Nice. Any other? Do you want to shout anything else out for her?
That's kind of the big thing. So she, my wife Nichelle, she's also a chiropractor. She takes care of moms and babies, and then I'm kind of rest of the family. So more sports, orthopedics, so on and so forth. But she's strictly moms and babies.
Nice.
Yeah. It's a good team.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Cover the whole spectrum. It's kind of what me and my wife do. She's actually upstairs right now. She's doing her sex and relationship therapy practice, and so she's kind of covering that side of things, the connection side, and then we're on this side of it, the physical side. So Live Loud Chiropractic and Coaching. What is the coaching part?
So coaching part from we both have personal training background, so we do in some capacity offer that as kind of a service, but it's trying to expand upon what others would kind of see as chiropractic in kind of like an exclusivity standpoint, showing that what we do is try to provide information and services that go beyond just what you would assume chiropractic adjustments is. So whether that would be nutrition guidelines or coaching, if you will, movement coaching, some personal training, so on and so forth. And then obviously with my wife, if you would call it like birth preparation coaching, and then obviously one of her big specialties is postpartum rehab. So, postpartum rehab coaching. So when you just say chiropractic in that standpoint, people kind of limit to what that could be. So coaching kind of opens that up.
Yeah, I've been struggling with the same thing with the physio side. People hear physio, they think hot packs, electrical stimulation, maybe a little manual therapy, massage, what have you. And I'm like, I do a little more than that. So I've been struggling in the same, and I kind of use long-term health coach. That's my kind of thing, and connecting all those dots, the 5 pillars of health. I think we talked a little bit about that in our last meeting around. I do the movement, mindset, connection, recovery, and then the nutrition side as well. So yeah, we have a lot of similarities there. I want to hear about the kettlebell stuff. I just commented on your Instagram there. I saw your last post about the Turkish get-ups. What's the challenge for November?
Oh yeah, so I've been doing.
Who wants to join? But I didn't see what the actual challenge was.
I just realized I didn't put too much in. So it's simple and sinister. For those who have followed kettlebells for a little bit, you've probably heard simple and sinister. Pavel Tsatsouline was strong first. Obviously, that's kind of a preliminary baseline program, and it's your quick and dirty and get things done. So it's 5 Turkish get-ups on each side. And then it's 100 single-arm kettlebell swings. Ideally, that's
100 per side or 50-50?
50-50,
okay.
Yeah. So ideally, it's done within 10 minutes. So you'd be basically going, the way I do it is I'll go Turkish get up, just alternating. That takes about 5 minutes. And then depending on my heart rate is, I'll get that down, and then I'll go right into swings. And I'll vary how I do it, but I usually get it done in about 9 minutes or so.
Awesome. Yeah.
And
what weight are you using for that?
Yeah, so currently I'm trying to do everything with 32 kilograms.
It's aggressive.
It's the swings catch up to a little bit, and then just kind of depending on the day. So the other day I was just cash, and I just did it with the 16 kilogram. But the 32 is kind of a nice, comfortable weight for me.
Awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, it's going well. It's kind of a restart program for me. I also decided to do that as an actual surgical pre-op program. I'm actually scheduled to get surgery on my meniscus in a couple weeks. I have a bucket handle there.
Right. You mentioned that. Yeah.
Oddly enough, it was from pistol squats, and it was not in a workout. This was actually a warm up where I was in the hole and I just came up really hard to see what I could do, and felt a big old pop. But this is actually something that feels actually pretty good on the knee, and it's giving me enough kind of components of strength going into that. Yeah,
I'll share for those watching, listening. I think that anytime there's knee issues, really putting a lot of stress on that posterior chain and getting more of that pull that we tend to be very quad dominant. A lot of knee issues tend to be that anterior, the front pull quads. And so doing a lot of what he's describing, especially with the kettlebell swings, it's just waking up the hamstrings, the glutes. Sorry if there's a little noise. Got a neighbor driving by here. Live TV, folks. And any of that kind of posterior chain, if we want to call it that, seems to really help a lot of the knee stuff because you're just taking a lot of stress and balancing that out. So that's awesome that you're kind of a living example of that right now.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. So when it happened, I basically got up and I called my wife. I was like, "Hey, I messed something up." Like, when you feel a pop in the chair, that's kind of indicative of something that happened. And I was warming up for a workout I was doing, which at that time I was doing a double clean and press program that had basically clean and press, pull ups, and then swings. So I actually did my workout, and I was all posterior dominant. And after that workout, literally 30 minutes after I did this, I felt like nothing was wrong.
Right.
It felt completely fine. And then I kneeled down to play with my kiddo on the mat, and it didn't lock up, but it basically went back to ground zero. So for the next 4 to 5 weeks following that, I aggressively rehabbed it, obviously dealing with pain management and fluid, but everything was posterior chain dominant. So I actually did a ton of kettlebell swings. And then other than that, I did a lot of supported knee flexions where I was actually intentionally driving anterior stress forward, but severely unloaded so that it was used more as a pumping mechanism for more of like fluid management. And then everything else was posterior dominant. So I was hesitant to actually go into surgery because it actually was doing so good.
Right.
And the only reason why I got an MRI was to confirm that it was a meniscus so that I can say, this is how I rehabbed a meniscus tear.
Right.
But based on where it's at, it made the decision of pulling the gun.
Yeah. And I want to, again, point out of that story, the traditional injury methodology has been rest, ice, compression, elevation, maybe more for like ankle sprains, but still if somebody has an injury, that tends to be what gets prescribed versus this kind of natural method and what, again, I'll give Kelly Starrett a lot of credit here, movement, compression, elevation. So instead of RICE, we have MCE, movement, which he described a lot, compression, which is kind of doing mechanically, with that movement component where you're trying to flush out the fluid, and that's that fluid management. And then elevation, again, I don't know if there was enough fluid in there that you felt the need to even elevate, but
I didn't do a lot of elevation, to be honest. More so just because any stagnation, even though at an elevated standpoint, just made it tighter.
Right.
So even if I will take that back. If I was elevated, I basically leaned in back, kicking and pumping. So I was trying to combine the compression and elevation, but movement felt better more than anything.
Awesome.
And that's really, and as you and I both know, that's really a direction that we take for a lot of the rehab.
And the other part of elevation I want to point out real quick that I've seen a lot of folks kind of mess up on is that they have a standing desk or they have a desk, and they're like, I'm elevating my leg by putting it here. And they're like, it's elevated above where it normally is, but if it's not above the heart, the level of the heart, there's no actual fluid mechanics. So it has to, it's my elbow that has swelling in it. I would need to elevate above my heart so that it you can see my heart shirt here, but it would pump down. So that concept of elevation, again, for anyone going through a surgery, so when he's done with his meniscus meniscectomy, right, that's what they're doing. They're just cleaning it up a little bit. Yeah, so again, we try to avoid surgery as much as possible, but there's times when it's definitely necessary. But afterwards, if there's a little bit of swelling, again, and I had my ACL done back in 2008, so I would almost lay down and have my leg completely 90 degrees up against the wall so that it's just allowing maximum gravity to get all that swelling out of there in combination with a lot of this other stuff. So, yes.
And I think what's also important too, what we see with sometimes injuries is when you're in an elevated standpoint with so much of the guarding that happens after an injury, in that example where most people would prop their foot up, their foot would be the only thing supported. So your knee is slowly going into extension.
Right.
And for those that have guarding tension or pain, that can then sometimes create an adverse reaction of making you tighter
Mhm.
because it's more or less unsupported, if you will.
Right. Yeah. So coming back to it, kettlebells, we touched on that. You wanted to go a little deeper. I mean, I'll just shout out the fact that, I'm going to steal your simple answer here is they're just super time efficient, right? And again, you have 10 minutes, boom, it was simple and effective, or is that?
Simple and sinister.
Simple and sinister.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try that later today, and I'll report how that goes. I don't know if I'll jump into the 32, actually, even though I feel like I can, but might start at the 24 there. But simple and sinister. So kettlebells, all things. I noticed also on some of your social media posts, you have folks for back pain, which is one thing I think everybody should understand out there. I do this as well. If you have low back pain, learn to deadlift with a kettlebell. It's a phenomenal tool. So I'll let you go into like why kettlebells. Why is that such a focus for you? Is it just time efficiency, or is it kind of more to it than that?
I think it's a combination, and that's obviously a big component. So I first was introduced to kettlebells by a buddy of mine in grad school, and this was like 2008, and this was kind of like CrossFit's kicking off and all that type of stuff. And this was back when there was only a couple manufacturers that even made it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in San Jose, there was one that was 5 minutes down the road. This was back when a 20 kilo cost like $150.
Right.
And
it's kind of getting back to that now.
Yes,
COVID,
supply and demand. And so we just started with the basics of swings, and I've never achieved, that kind of workout, if you want to call it that, where, you got the sweat, but you feel like you were working really hard, and it's kind of fell in love from there. But as a parent and a business owner, time efficiency is definitely one of the big things.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the population that we treat, which we don't see, I would say, more weekend warrior athletes, if you will. We don't see a lot of like high-end athletes.
Right.
It's a lot of families, so it's a lot of dads, it's a lot of moms. And when you're dealing with garage space, and you're dealing with, kid toys everywhere. Having a tool that's super effective and efficient that doesn't take up a lot of space is also very beneficial. But also the nature of the shape of the kettlebell, which is unique to dumbbells and everything else. If you read a little bit more, like on the Strong First website and everything, adding different torque, being able to load yourself in just asymmetrical types of way, if you will.
Yeah.
I think is just super beneficial. Now, there's obviously nuances that don't allow you to load it up as well, which creates some rate limiting factors. But in my mind, that's actually a benefit, right? Where, when I'm rehabbing someone back from, let's say, a disc injury or lower back pain, they want to get back on the barbell right away.
Right.
And so I try to encourage them. I'm like, hey, let's see what the heaviest double front rack 5x5 set you can get to.
Right.
And that's just a whole different stimulus to them that maybe that it's just that they're not used to, but just having that weight in front of you, creating that more upright posture, so on and so forth, and just the amount of core activation, quote unquote core activation, stability, trunk stability that it generates without you having to, really forcefully do that. I find to be super beneficial. So from a rehab standpoint, that's why I use it a lot. So easy access, you don't have to have a barbell. It's a lot better buy-in. Someone's just like, oh, I just need to go buy one piece of equipment and I can get this far, and that's super beneficial.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, the learning curve, I think, is so much faster. And it's all the things you just said of the benefits of this tool. However, you look at F45s and all these kind of fitness trends, and I think they kind of butcher a lot of kettlebell swings, and you see some really bad form, and not to throw people under the bus and talk negatively, but at the same time, I want to throw people under the bus and talk negatively. So, I'm from New York, that's what we do.
But you have to also consider too, right? Look what CrossFit did to barbells early on.
Yeah, but that's the learning curve, and again, I still think that at the end of the day, you could argue, CrossFit ultimately, it was pretty shitty form. And if you watch some of those videos, it's scary stuff. Even today, you can still, and I've seen some gold medal Olympic athletes break down, the top CrossFit athletes lifting under these extreme loads and, breaking down their form and saying, oh, well, they could have done this and this and this. Yeah, we can nitpick some of that stuff, but at the end of the day,
you do it all day.
Yeah, I still think CrossFit as a whole, and I'm not saying everyone should go and jump into a CrossFit class right now, but as a whole has done more for the concept of fitness to promote it, just based on, again, going through some of those learning curves. But again, you just see, I'll stand up and I'm going to show this. When you see these like straight arm kettlebell swings where you clearly the arms are not working and there's no connection between you're kind of just doing work. If anyone out there does that, if anyone sees that, if you see your loved ones doing that, just yell at them, tell them to put it down. And it breaks my heart to see it because when you do it right, and again, it's so simple. You just need somebody that one-on-one time, a little bit of that one-on-one time, and it goes so far to be like, oh, okay, like I can actually like snap my hips and my arms don't need to do a lot. They can just kind of, we say arms are like strings, hands are like hooks, and you're just holding onto the bell, and the legs are doing all the work. So that's where, again, when I was referring to his knee pain and the fact that it's a posterior chain, right? It's not an arm workout. If you feel your arms working a ton with kettlebell swings, eventually maybe that'll hit it when you hit 100 reps of single arm swings. But anyway, I can certainly go down that path for a while. But go ahead.
Well, I think what's interesting too, what just jumps to mind is I had a CrossFit athlete. She is a master's athlete, so she's games caliber level. And
is her name Julie?
Yeah. So we were working from a certain
Julie, if you're watching.
We were working from a certain component on. She had a previous knee injury and surgery.
Yep.
And she was lacking power and knee extension is how she described it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously with certain lifts, and when you're talking about heavy lifts where it's slow and it's slower and not as dynamic and forceful, that's one thing. But one thing we jumped on, in my opinion, that was super beneficial was heavy kettlebell swings.
Right.
Because hip extension is going to be one of your best knee extensors.
Yes.
Stuart McGill references, right? So
yeah.
there's workarounds where people don't even know that you're working on certain things just by saying, hey, power and explosion, if done right. But then also, helping people when they're saying, hey, I'm lacking this. And then just like, well, you're doing it in this, we see a lot of with CrossFit, right? Momentum is something they try to harness.
Yes.
But momentum, while that can be a benefit, that can also be a detriment to you because if you can actually kill momentum, that means you're working more, which means you're doing things maybe more appropriately or better.
For sure. Yeah, with a lot of CrossFit athletes, when you try to challenge them to do certain things strict, to do certain moves that are not in that repertoire, and again, understanding like, okay, CrossFit generally is on a high level, especially where we're talking about this CrossFit Games concept. It's kind of like 17, and what's her name? Jillian Michaels kind of butchered this concept, but when she was criticizing CrossFit, but it is kind of 17 basic things that you're doing and movement patterns, and there are definitely, we could say 5 to 10 other things that's like maybe we should mix some of that in there, and that'll make your body a little bit healthier. So that's where, again, when you slow things down, when you challenge things, when you really understand the sport and the needs and the demands of that sport, that's where we can really elevate things. So along those lines, I think that segues us nicely into kind of the next thing you want to talk about, fixing squat stance and other modifications for leveraging and pain modification. So where do you want to go with that? And
yeah. So kettlebells, I think within that, right, are a great tool for example, right, if someone's having shoulder impingement syndrome, doing strict press with the barbell, or maybe not even strict, it could be push press or anything else, being that you're fixated, both hands are fixed, you don't have as much of that ability to actually rotate. Now, you can generate torque, which is good, but if you're going overhead and you have a pinch, an easy movement modification that allows you to continue with your working out and programming that might just be a workaround so you desensitize the tissue is a kettlebell, right? Because you have that ability, dumbbell, whatever that is. So I think it's a useful tool in that sense as well, as it allows you to get out of a lot of these ways or these things that might be causing temporary issues that creates pain or whatever else. So that being said too, your last guest, Ryan, right? So Ryan Stewart McGill, Ryan DeBell, Movement Fix. He really opened up my eyes, and I think a lot of people with his the article that broke the internet. But why everyone squats differently, and from what you've seen as a practitioner, just time over time, is that when we box people in, saying that you need to squat feet width or hip width apart, feet are hip width apart, and toes straight. That is putting everyone into a box, right? Now, for the general, that might work well for most people, but if you're trying to optimize squat, if you're trying to leverage body mechanics and the lever arms of the legs, you need to find the optimal stance. And so we do basically a hip scour, hip screening on everyone who's doing some form of squatting lift, and then just trying to provide some additional guidance. And when we do this, we encourage what might seem like a more open stance with a little bit of foot flare. But then we do it based on feel, right? So when I say, hey, just because I said this looks better from a visual standpoint from my coach's eye, I need it to feel good for you. I need you to feel strong, and basically the rules or requirements that I go off of. Can you maintain, not a neutral, like, really rigid, strict spine, but can we maintain a long torso, and can we maintain our foot positioning? So we're not over-pronating, we're not over-supinating, we're not doing the squat dance, which is you see some people, like, the moment they start to go down, their feet want to go out, so they kind of do this squat dance that goes back and forth. Like, that to me is an indication that a wider stance is going to work better for them. And this carries over dramatically with lower back pain, adding into, we're not butt wink Nazis here, but we definitely monitor that, especially if it's someone that is hypersensitive. Right.
And I'll add to that. So to hopefully, if you guys, I think we're going down a very nerdy rabbit hole. So anyone who's not in, has multiple degrees like we do, might be missing some of these concepts if they haven't studied this stuff. So I want to simplify to say, if we did MRI of your hip, so he's talking about we're doing a physical assessment of what's going on, the ball and socket in there, but I've definitely seen, and I don't know if this is something you've noticed with doctors out here, as I'm newer to the area, but in New York City, we would see MRIs of hips, and it would say the right hip is at 12 degrees in a resting position, and then the left is at 8 degrees. So you see a little bit. So that would possibly indicate that it's normal for that person to have a squat stance that's a little bit 12 and 8 degrees. Maybe doesn't have to be exactly perfectly like that, but there are those natural imbalances and asymmetries. For me, I know my right hip's a lot tighter than my left hip. I do that as well. I mean, I competed at a decently high level in CrossFit, and when I would snatch, my right leg would jump out and my left leg would kind of be more stuck, so to speak, but that's the one that was probably stronger. The right one was the one that needed to possibly compensate more. So you would see these imbalances. I'm curious, if you would try to fix that for me, or would we leave that kind of be?
I think there's multiple factors, right? I think it depends on the level at which you're trying to achieve, the weights in which you're trying to do. So obviously when you're talking about the snatch, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're throwing,
my feet are jumping out, and you guys can see it on the video. There's a little bit of this right foot is turned out more.
Yeah, and so I think there's also things to consider too. Like, does that happen only at 90%, 95% and above? Where, for a lot of people, when you're seeing 95% and above, when you're talking about one rep max and so on and so forth, you're going to see a lot of things compensate and change. The goal is to make the lift. Is that going to deter you down over time? Maybe, maybe not. But if everything's sub-maximal to that is then tied in, I think it might be okay. But the other thing that we also look at is looking at retroversion or antroversion and trying to get a sense, is that actually more of a bony alignment change, or if it is just soft tissue. So I had a patient who played football since the time he was 5 all the way up through high school. So in his most developmental years, he was playing center. And when he was playing center as a lineman, if anyone sees linemen set up, there's often a staggered stance where one's a little bit more flared. So his right hip basically grew a torsion, just like we see with baseball players.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was a quarterback in high school, and even though we weren't the best throwing team in the world, I attribute a lot of that to my tight right hip too.
Exactly, right? So you see these things where maybe it's a tighter hip that's musculo, that you could adapt and maybe make some changes with, but that could have been just over the years your body created that. So for him, he came to me with a lower back injury that ended up being confirmed annular tear. And when we were breaking it down into a squatting program, and even though he was a strength and conditioning coach, owned a gym, everything, he felt that it needed to be hip width apart, toes straight, right? And that just created so much tension in his hips that then to get lower to achieve the depth that he was hoping to, created excessive amount of lumbar flexion, and then over time that just, what we attributed to, deteriorated down. Obviously there's years of things that accumulate to that, but then in our rehab process, I was just like, hey, this is definitely changed. You have a different torsion angle on each hip. I think it's okay for this one to be out a little bit more. And that helped with the rehab process, obviously getting back to building, so on and so forth. And then ultimately, now that he has healed that, he's able to lift and achieve all the squatting that he wants to do.
Right, and this is where, from my perspective, I'll add my kind of 2 cents in that clinical assessment. If I had someone like that, I would also be assessing as much as possible the strength imbalances and the single leg step-ups, pistols, that kind of split stance squat, any of these kind of things where we could say, hey, your left leg is 20% stronger than your right leg in these different kind of ways we're putting these pieces together. So maybe we should spend some time balancing that out and fixing that strength and balance, whether and while we're possibly doing some different mobility concepts, whether it's musculoskeletal or structural, and then putting those pieces together. So that's kind of how I work, and I think it sounds like kind of that's within your realm as well. So we touched on low back pain. Your guy came to you with low back pain, so that's kind of our third main topic here is low back pain solutions, acute versus chronic. Where do you want to go with that from a chiropractic perspective? Again, real quick, I'll set it up to say again, most people. I've criticized the physical therapy profession. We did there was a webinar a few months ago that I did where we were looking at a study that went out to the public, and they asked them, who would you go to for low back pain? Which practitioner? And this is something I'm also exploring on my other podcast, the Man Better podcast with David Corona. Check that out. And so that study showed number one, I believe, I don't remember the exact order, but it was your primary care doctor. Which I think is a bit of a waste of time. No offense to primary care doctors. I think you're going to save a lot of money, time, energy going to either a physio or chiro. But the research showed general public in terms of education, primary care doctor, chiropractors, massage therapists, acupuncturists, and I believe physical therapists were fifth on that list. Where, again, from a survey perspective, I don't remember the exact numbers, but yeah, we do a terrible job as a profession of promoting ourselves to say, hey, you have back pain, see us. I mean, chiropractors have every rap song, it's like I'm back like a chiropractor. Like it's embedded in the culture, so to speak. So coming back to it, I think I wanted to set that up of like we see chiropractors as, again, and we were talking a little bit before we went online, of you have back pain, you come in, crack, come see me 3 times a week, and this is the oversimplified, stereotypical kind of thing of come see me 3 times a week, and I'm just going to keep cracking you, and every time you have a little bit of pain, come back and see me, and I'm going to be the guy who can fix you. Where it sounds like you're definitely not practicing that model. You're incorporating these concepts of let's get you stronger as well, and let's include that coaching stuff. So yeah, I just low back pain solutions. Whether you want to touch on the professions, I did want to touch on that. Who's that? Hey, Rosin.
Yeah. So at the tail end of my program at Palmer College of Chiropractic at the West Campus, they were trying to, just like every business continues to refine their message, so on and so forth, right? And as a whole, they were trying to get the name chiropractic more directed towards your spine specialist.
Right.
And most people know chiropractors, the main things you're adjusting is the spine. And for a lot of people, they don't even know other chiropractors adjust extremities and things like that as well. So I think with that sense, you just kind of more so associate chiropractor, spine, low back pain is spine. You're going to start there. Physical therapists, everyone knows you guys can rehab a general amount of things really well. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion from the general public comes. But in my opinion, whether you're seeing a good chiro or good physio, it's going to look almost the exact same. So for that, obviously we have certain members on each side of the profession that are, very palliative. And adjustments are basically passive care as well, right? Active care being what can you do versus what I can do for you, right? So an adjustment, manual therapy, dry needling, hot packs, e-stim, all those things, while they are extremely beneficial for desensitizing pain and helping in that solution, which is advantageous, that's passive care. But I always start with, whether it's acute or chronic, what can you do first and foremost to make positive impacts or changes on the pain that you're experiencing, right? So for a chronic patient, you can definitely accelerate that and be a little bit more aggressive with the active care, just because you can rule out pretty definitively, depending on how chronic it is. Any sort of
chronic, for those listening, is anything really over 3 months. I think we can agree on that definition,
yes,
more or less.
So when we're chatting, right, how long has it been going on for, right? So if it's 3 months, I might be a little bit, more sensitive with it. But if someone's like, I've had back pain for like 3 years,
right,
I'm like, I'm hitting this.
Right. I think anything above 3 months technically becomes chronic by like research, medical definitions. And the other part of that is, I've had back pain for like the last 10 years, not consistently, but you get episodes where it's not 10 years of back pain, hopefully, but you get, again, that pain, and then maybe it happens every 3 years, and this is a common thing, right? People kind of, again, kick the can down the road, maybe deal with it again in that passive treatment. It fixes that, or it feels a little better. Then it happens every 2 years, then every 1 year, then every few months, and now, you know, somebody woke up finally, and it's a 10 out of 10 pain, and now that's kind of the progression of that. So that's where chronic can have a little bit of that. So I just want to give that little color.
Yeah, no, that's good, because you'll get people come in and it's like, oh, I've had back pain the last few years. I come in, my chiro adjusted, and I'm good.
Right.
I just need you to do that, right? I was like, well, that's not a solution,
Right,
from what it sounds like. So then you dive into it. But so depending on where it kind of stands or what they're coming in for would change slightly what I do. But whether it's chronic, 10 years, 3 months, or acute like this just happened, it's going to revolve first and foremost around hinging and squatting. It's always going to be hinging and squatting.
So a very movement-based approach.
For sure, yeah. So
and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I want to really throw that at the people listening, watching. Of again, you kind of alluded to it, but I have to say it time and time again. So I just really want to make sure this is clear, and I might cut this exact piece, and I'm doing the hand signals for my own editing later. Yeah. So if you get so a chiropractic adjustment. A physical therapy adjustment we call a little different, high velocity, low amplitude thrust, or whatever. But whatever you call it, whether you, again, dry needling, he alluded to a lot of these passive modalities. Even if you get a massage that feels awesome. The research shows really well, something's happening. And you're going to get up off the table and you're like, oh, yeah, I feel good. And you have less pain. If you're not doing something active, like the kettlebell, like a squat and a hinge, if there's no active and like, okay, you feel better, good, see you, see you next time. By the time you get to your car, you've probably lost 75% of the benefits. I'm kind of exaggerating the numbers, and I'm kind of throwing them out of nowhere. And this is where research is really hard to do. And there is follow-up in the research where it's like a week later, no other intervention happened. And maybe there's some education, maybe there's not, but there's a huge lack of understanding of, even with the needles, as soon as I take needles out, and I've started doing needles since I moved here because I couldn't do them in California and New York, different story. But as soon as the needles come out, and again, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to make sure you do some active thing, even if it's just grab a rubber band and do some pull aparts, just so we can reset the nervous system, because famous quote is, strength is gained in the range in which it is trained. So again, really easy visual here for those watching it. If my arm can only go here, and Dr. Antonio gives me a little pop, and now I can go here, and sorry for the armpit sweat there. But yeah, now I can go all the way here. By the time, again, I get to my car and I leave his office, we might have lost a lot of that benefit. But if as soon as we have that extra, 20 degrees of motion, I'm gonna, and I think it sounds like you can agree with me if you like, but you're in that same mindset of like, we need to get strong here. We need to get your brain to understand that extra 20 degrees. Otherwise, it's gonna go back to that kind of poor pattern.
Yeah, the way I always say it, right, is just like, hey, we just gave your body all this new range of motion and this new proprioceptive input. You have to use it. You have to give your body some sort of context as to what actually just happened, and train it so that it creates a better framework. Right. And that's really what it is, over and over again. Right. So going back, to the squat standpoint and the active care, my thought is, like, if I can get you, even if it's 5 or 10% improvement, if you can create 5 or 10% improvement without me touching you, right, and with compounding interest, that will get better, and hopefully that just stacks upon itself, then you'll be able to get through this a lot quicker, because you don't need me to be there every time it hurts a little bit, right? Because as we do know, with any sort of injury, there will be flare-ups. Right. And a lot of people, when they flare up, they're calling because they're just like, hey, I need you to adjust me again because I just flared up. It's like, no, you need to do this. And then, depending on where it goes, we'll help facilitate it. So we're a catalyst, we're a facilitator to the process, we're not the process. So for acute, the craziest thing for acute disc, acute flexion intolerant low back pain, the thing that I have found to be the most beneficial is squatting. Now, that could be body weight squats. It could be a ring TRX suspension trainer supported squat, or what I call like doorknobs. You can hook a hand on each doorknob. And this is just through trial and error. I've had a couple people that are so sensitive that I can't even get them on the table to start a dry needling or some sort of palliative intervention. And by offloading a little bit more, not posterior and change dominant, but a little bit of more weight in the heels, and then being able to facilitate an upright torso with a wider stance. And maybe it's a pumping action, maybe there's a little traction, maybe it's just the hips kind of getting more aligned. But I've had a ton of people that can then walk more effectively. Their pain is reduced. And so that's our kind of entry level. And for them, it seems to be beneficial. So if you've been sitting too long, because you do have to go back to work, you jump up and you do squats every so long. Yeah. So squatting is
Speaking of, I'm not used to sitting this long.
Yeah.
It's already, we're at 25 minutes. I'm not used to that. Anyway, go ahead.
So squatting by far is one of the first things. Also because, life involves sitting. So it teaches you a way to move in a manner that maybe won't pick at it, so on and so forth. And then the other part is hinging. So again, there's a range. It could just be a good morning or a body weight hinge that allows you to bend over to pick things up. If you're a parent and you have kids, like your kid's gonna want to be picked up. So if you're super sensitive and have flexion tall and low back pain, how are you gonna do that? Right. So it creates much more of a framework and a context around everyday lifestyles, because once you leave my office, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour later, real world hits you. And you need to know what to do, and then we keep integrating what we need and leveling up in progressions from there. But the framework always revolves around that. So if someone does a few of these movements and they're seeing benefit, cool. This is what you do when you go home: rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, right. And then we'll layer that on. And then depending, MDT, Mckenzie Protocol.
Yeah, I was literally gonna ask you about that. I was waiting for you to. So you mentioned flexion and tolerance. For anyone not familiar, Mckenzie, and I'd love to hear from a chiropractic perspective and just your perspective in general, but the way I would describe it is, and quick funny story is when I took the Mckenzie course. Have you taken the actual course?
I'm not, so I've taken other courses that integrated.
Yeah, so it's a pretty straightforward concept, but the funny-ish story is when I took the course, the instructor was very adamant that exercise is useless, course training was useless. And this is early on in my career. I think it was my first year being out in practice. So in school, we learn a lot of the research, and there's a stack of articles that I probably had like in my backpack just because I was that big of a nerd of core this, core that. And again, we know strengthening some version of the core is good for back pain to some extent. But he was saying, you don't need any of that. It's useless. And he was very adamant. So we almost got into a fight based on that. I was up in front of the class and I was like arguing with him half the time, but I actually got one of my best friends who's a physical therapist with the Sacramento Kings now, who was running that course, and she's like, "Who is this guy? I want to meet him. He's an asshole, but I want to meet him." But anyway, Mckenzie, basically the basic theory is our discs are jelly donuts, and it's been a little bit disproven as far as the actual mechanism, but the basic concept is you have a herniated disc, your jelly is going out, because again we're like this all the time, so the jelly's sticking out. For those listening, sorry, it's you should be able to get the concept though. And basically, if you have that, now you might be flexion intolerant, and extension feels better. So you're going to do 1,000 press ups or just lean back. So you're pushing the jelly back in. So it goes along the lines, I think, of the squat concept to some extent. And again, I utilize it, but I'd love to hear again your take on it for sure.
Well, and let's consider too like a scenario where maybe the annular. So with the way it starts is the outer component. So jelly donut, the outer component is fibrous connective tissue, very strong. That's why. So your back is not weak; it's very strong. But as that potentially delaminates or breaks down because of repetitive poor movement patterns, lifting, whatever that might be.
Sorry, I want to throw in there before you continue. The in the medical space, it is well understood that I think it's 72% of people, if we took 100 people on the street right now, 72% of them would have disc herniations or some kind of abnormality, bulge or whatever you want to call it, but no pain. So I'll throw it back to you, but again, just making that point that just because you have a bulge and people get caught up with, we did an MRI, you now have an issue. And now that becomes your mentality versus the fact most people have a lot of bulges, and it shouldn't necessarily always correlate to pain. So that hopefully helps this topic.
Yeah. So case in point at the beginning of the conversation, like currently right now, I have no knee pain. The only time I have knee pain is in extreme flexion with torque, where that bucket handle is getting stressed. Right. I can run. I can lift heavy, I can squat heavy, I have no pain. That's why I didn't want to do it. But there are certain times in which I feel this instability, and that's more of just from a mental standpoint. But so for lower back pain, right? And you could have you could have an annular tear, which means no bulge, right? And that could be very symptomatic. So where I also find Mckenzie to be beneficial is not from a a herniation reduction standpoint, but almost from a mobility, a mice protocol, MCE, not without the elevation.
Right.
But with movement and compression, I'm creating spinal compression in a non-sensitized direction, which allows me to create more movement, which allows a stiff, guarded lower back to actually move and keep mobility and more movement from happening. So in that case, I use it a lot in that regard.
Right. So that's what I'll also say is I've taken it and turned it into my own version, which it sounds like we're kind of again on the same page, which is great. But basically, if I and people will connect with me online and say, hey, I have back pain, what do I do? I'll say, cool, try this, and I'll send them a video. Basically, go down, touch your toes, and again, they taught this in the course. Does it make it same, better, or worse? And then lean back. Does that make it same, better, or worse? And then anywhere it's same or better, let's do more of that. Anywhere it's worse, let's avoid that for now until we're desensitizing and again changing a little bit of the way the brain operates. So again, the brain sees threat and pain is that signal of threat of like, hey, I don't like this. So again, for some people, I just had a client right now a day ago that when she goes down, that was painful. So we have to go back more, and that was pleasant, and it was making the pain better. So it was just like, okay, do that throughout the day. Where again, Mckenzie, and they have a $10 book. I think it's Treat Your Own Back or whatever it's called, and it's $10, and it explains this very clearly. So again, it's an interesting concept. I think it has its place. So that's where I definitely want to hear your take on that.
Awesome. Yeah, and what I found too is the traditional press up.
Yes.
Right? Because you're supposed to be more upper body dominant where you're not using your spinal extensors to lift you up as much and try to make it more passive, if you will, meaning you're not like doing like a Superman lift, which takes a lot of spinal compression. I find that people, especially when they're in acute pain, it's just very hard for them to do that. So reverse engineering that, starting on a quadruped position. So starting on your hands and knees, shifting forward, and then letting your hips drop. So hip drops as opposed to a press up.
Yeah.
And that seems to work a lot more effectively for people that are definitely more sensitized. And it's a lot easier to kind of get into a flow, liking the concept of more movement rather than like sitting down and holding, is doing more like a pumping action where you're going in and out, in and out. And like you were doing the standing extension, I call that the 9-year-old man at the gym. You see the 9-year-old at the gym and he's like, he knows what's up. He's just loosening up. So for a lot of us, we have this what people assume to be chronic lower back pain. It's just tension. It's your body's way of saying you're not moving enough. We're avoiding certain positions, and with that, even though we might be flexion intolerant, that's the finicky part about lower back pain is like how and when do you start introducing flexion for someone that was so sensitized, or if they did have a confirmed disc bulge, if they did have hard neurological signs, because you have to reintegrate flexion, and that's the hardest part. That's the hardest part.
Yeah, and I mean, even when I took that course back in 2008 or 9 or whenever that was, what was going on in my brain is this motion is lotion concept. So they're teaching and using this. They call it a mechanical diagnostic treatment. So again, you're looking which direction. Okay, you're flexion intolerant or extension. So I was like, why don't we just, if we don't have symptoms, we're kind of missing that boat of prevention. And again, prevention isn't sexy. If you're watching this and you don't have pain, or you have some aches and pains, I would encourage you to make sure you're moving your spine. And this is where CrossFit, as a general concept, and again, the kettlebells also, different modalities like that are in fact moving your spine in through these different concepts. And spine, as we know, discs respond best to motion. And again, I always analogize it to kind of the jelly donut thing, but also again, when we wake up in the morning, right, we're actually taller because our discs are allowing to get more nutrition, and they're overnight they're building back up. By the end of the day, we shrink a little because the compression of the day. So again, these concepts when I learned them back in school and through these continuing education courses, say why don't we just move discs in a controlled manner and make sure there's this exposure constantly. And just like we were talking about, the CrossFit has these 17 motions, but it's missing these other 10. That's the same concept to me of like, we need to look at a human and say, hey, what are you doing? And again, you kind of alluded to the fact, a lot of people are just sitting a lot and they're not doing a lot of extension. And that's the most common, like really easy, again, oversimplifying, like we're just stuck in this position and we're not going into extension. The same thing happens at the shoulder or the knee of going really deep flexion, like you're talking about in the mechanism of injury. Like maybe your body just wasn't ready, you just hadn't trained enough at that deep range of motion with a little bit of a torque, or you weren't able to control that torque.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it was 100% my fault. And like, I knew when it happened.
Right.
what it was. Which I'm interested. Have you heard of? I mean, obviously a guy that's been blown up on the internet, Knees Over Toes.
Yeah, Knees Over Toes guy, sure.
So I've been tinkering around with some of their programs and just seeing, obviously, like, and that's what's crazy is like a lot of their split squat, deep knee flexion things. Like I can do that, but from a compression standpoint, going vertically, obviously changes it, but. It's loading tissue, it's loading tendons, it's compression, and it's the novelty that we don't do enough of.
Yeah,
that's what's
a lot. For those not familiar, it's a lot of knees over toes. So we do that when we're walking up or down stairs, right? But I'm doing it now for anyone watching. But it's also, if you watch their videos, it's standing and like trying to touch your toes or knees as far into like you see guys touching the pool in front of them, right? And they're able to touch the water and come back and have that control through the toes, through the knees, these novel approaches. The other big one is walking backwards with a sled, which I have been doing for a long time and I think is a huge component of strength and conditioning that gets overlooked because it's like, this is boring. But it is that like our bodies just don't do this. It's not loading the body the right way. So that's where, again, this strength and conditioning concept, we could certainly nerd out on it and go down that path. But yeah, the knees over toes concept is very novel. And that's where it's like, nobody's doing this. And that's where they've kind of blown up, I think, and shown. And I don't think that everything in there works for everybody. Sure. And again, I've had clients come to me virtually that said, hey, I tried this one in Australia recently that had all sorts of knee stuff going on. And she tried the knees over toes program. And I do think it was a little bit too generic almost, where it made her worse. Because, and in terms of customer service, at least her complaint, and I don't have a ton. I don't know if you've actually had other people who bought into their program and coaching and things like that, but that was the one main experience I had with that.
Well, and there's obviously a ton of benefits to just having the one-on-one, right? Like to have someone to say like, hey, the way you're doing this, like in this application, right? Like Dan John always says, squats aren't bad. It's how you're doing squats that are bad.
There are no bad exercises, really. We can probably throw a few in there, but Rosin just missed that. I'm going to repeat: walking backwards with a sled. So you have the sled in front of you, and you're pulling it as you're walking backwards. But walking backwards in general, uphill, changing the stimulus. If you have a treadmill, set it to 10% incline and just walk backwards at a steady speed. Anything like that. Again, it's just that novelty of things that we don't normally do. Something I discovered again back when I was in physical therapy school is there are retro marathons. So you run the whole thing backwards.
That's right.
And it doesn't have to be 26.2 miles per se, but just running backwards a ton is something that, again, it's just that novel approach where, again, for anyone who runs and does one, or again, Peloton is something I love picking on because it's just so like one single thing and you're in this really bad position. So like, where's the cross training? That's a simple concept. That's where CrossFit came from. It's cross training. It's cross contamination, if you want to call it that, but it's changing the stimulus on your body and saying, can we mix up the modality and the things that we're doing to our bodies to maybe get a better fitness to decrease injury? And that sounds like, again, a lot of these topics that we're bouncing around here.
And I think with anything, right, it comes down to just, and it comes down to what do you enjoy doing. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if it's just very single track, we need some diversification. Mm-hmm. And obviously, just biking is not a very ergonomically friendly position that we were meant to be in. But it's one of those things like, when we're working with someone and there's like, I love doing Peloton, great, do Peloton, hit it hard.
Just add in this extra,
Exactly.
Yeah, again, when somebody's a vegan, I'll jump over to that nutrition side. We didn't even touch on that. I'd love to dive into that maybe another time. But and they're just eating this one type of food, but you're so deficient in these other vitamins and minerals, and maybe we need to do the blood work to show them, hey, you're not getting iron, and again, any vegetarian knows they need B12 and folate and all these different things that are just not common in that diet. And again, I'm not saying don't be a vegetarian, but make sure you're filling in those gaps. At least, and be aware of what it is. So again, Peloton, you're just not doing these things to your joints that need to get done. So again, if you're stuck in this rounded forward shoulder position, we need to make sure we're moving that through a full range of motion. Again, not to pick on your injury, but it's something that it's hard to know when that's going to happen, short of doing a very thorough and deep approach. But again, in terms of deep knee flexion under load, with, whether it's speed or whatever, like all those different concepts, yeah, I'm sure we could have done a very, methodical way to build up your pistol squat, which is possible, but at the same time, it's tough to know how much we need to build that up before that injury happens.
Well, and to give a little bit more framework and context, right? I have tight hips. My hips are very tight, whether it be the sports that I played, which was a lot of basketball and soccer, which tends to just be tighter in those athletes. I was weeks that preceded the event. I just, for whatever reason, Saturday morning, I'm gonna hit I don't do yoga ever, but it was like a deep hip series yoga stretch, and it was actually some deep, a lot of deep pigeon. That in the context of that little bit of flexion and torque, my medial meniscus and medial inner knee was actually quite sensitive after that, and it was fine. I was able to run and do everything else. And then in doing that, I think that kind of just precipitated some irritation. And then basically I was just going ass to grass, doing deep squats, mobility. I would shift to one leg and then I would pop up. And the right side is the deficient strength side, as we talked about before. Left leg just being more dominant from a plant standpoint of soccer. Right, just not having that also acuity standpoint. And I've done pistols before. Just based on my limb length too, pistols are quite challenging for me. And I mean, like, I shouldn't have been doing it, but like the left one was a struggle, and the right one came up halfway. So it's basically like someone who's trying to do a 1 rep max, where that last rep was a struggle and they barely got it up. I got one more. Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, ego over intelligence or whatever.
And for this, it wasn't even ego; it was just sheer curiosity. Like, can I do it? And this was,
and that just happened.
But it shows because the based on my strength levels and based on the requirement of strength that movement has, I was not strong enough. And that's just what it broke down to.
And that's where, again, having and so I don't. Do you have someone else coaching you, or are you just kind of doing your own thing?
Oh no, I'm just doing my own thing. I can't even hardly stick to my own program.
So yeah, even like I've had a coach for a long time to tell me what workouts to do and things like that. So every coach needs a coach as well. That's our kind of maybe lesson from that whole thing of saying, and as educated as this guy is, it's a phrase I've used a long time is listen to the whispers before they become yells. And he kind of heard the whispers, and not that he ignored it, but he almost leaned into it and said, what's that? Oh, okay, let me test it. And then that led to that. And then the other big takeaway for anyone listening or watching is injury only occurs when load exceeds capacity, right? So he was, again, with the pigeon, with the things, he started to kind of probably push on the capacity of that tissue in the medial meniscus, as he was referring to, and kind of, again, he's like, let me test it a little bit more and let me see what it can do. And unfortunately, that load that he put on with the pistol squat, the single leg squat, exceeded the capacity of what that tissue had. And that's where, again, coming back to, like you said, that has less strength, that has less things going for it. So that's where we can start to, again, create this profile through an assessment, which, again, I'm gonna plug myself here, and whether you're doing that virtually here, I can send you that right now if you want to comment below or connect with me. It's $199 and it's 21-point assessment, and then we can look at where your movement patterns are and then start to look at your capacity and give you that report card of what's going on, and then we can say, hey, like, I don't think you should be doing XYZ based on what these things are. Let's improve ABC because of XYZ until we can have the load and capacity in a more aligned position based on what you want to do. Again, he's obviously, again, super high educated, knows kind of what's going on and took that risk. So if you want to take those risks, cool, but know that there's guys like us who can help you with that. And so I think that's kind of a primary thing of what we're hoping to achieve with putting episodes like this out there.
Well, I think the most important thing too was because the stretching proceeded weeks before, and at the time of the event, I had no pain or irritation added. But it's also just having that mind-body awareness of what whispers actually are. Because I've never had any injury before, and to be honest, like, it was a whisper, but with all my ankle injuries and everything else, like, I know when things are like that's something. But I think there's also, I mean, unfortunately, like injuries are just obviously our goal is from a prevention standpoint to help prevent injuries by doing the assessments and everything like that. But I also see what happened for me, at least, as McGill has within his book, The Gift of Injury. This allows me to restructure things I've been sweeping under the rug myself for so long. Unfortunately, it came at the cost of this.
Yeah.
But with modern medicine and everything else,
it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Exactly,
and you'll learn from it. I mean, the same thing. That's a great book, Dr. Stuart McGill, Gift of Injury, with Brian Shaw. Brian Carroll. Brian Carroll is a big power lifter. Awesome story. And yeah, basically same thing. I had my ACL done right when I graduated from PT school back in 2008, and yeah, that taught me a lot about knees, ACLs. I went down that rabbit hole. I would consider myself an ACL expert for sure, knee expert, based on having gone through my own ACL injury. Yeah. And
I think a big thing which some CrossFit gyms are applying and do well at, but when there's the concept of athleticism, right? You've played sports. I've been in enough CrossFit gyms where I don't think the majority of them create athleticism. You get good at moving in certain ways, but I think the dynamic nature of actually sports play and things like that, recreational play is very important, and that's something honestly the last few years I have lost. And now you create strength to be able to handle and build up tissue tolerance, but just from a neurological standpoint of being able to move and being able to switch on and off and do those things is very important that a lot of people end up actually losing, and that deteriorates quite fast.
Yeah, and that's again, I love that concept, and we're coming up on an hour. I want to be respectful of your time and everyone's time, but I love that concept. And again, in terms of the definition of fitness and the 10 general physical skills that they talk about, agility's in there. And again, it's just hard to do in a class setting. For sure. And also, without a proper assessment, to say I have 20 people in my class and let's all do, the T-test or and I've seen this, the NFL Combine, and you have people doing as many reps at whatever bench press they can and doing jumps and things like that, where, if I have 20 people and I didn't assess them, maybe 10 of them should not even be attempting half of those activities or things. But that's where totally the definition of fitness, which is one I love going down that rabbit hole, and I might throw that at you in a second, is and the definition of fitness, as well as, again, that individualized approach and having somebody guide you through. Again, if I had, all things in retrospection, whatever. But yeah, if you had told me like, I had this weird knee pain, whatever, and if I was your coach and this is what I do online, I'd be like, hey, let's skip that pistol. I probably would have said, let's skip that pistol workout. Let's not, let's, but who knows? Who knows?
Well, and I never do pistols. This was literally just warm up. I'm like,
even more reason to not
messing around. Yeah.
And again, that's where injuries totally can happen. I'm sure a lot of us watching, listening have random stories. I tore my ACL with playing a game of pickup football, and someone dove into my knee. Like that stuff happens. Yeah. And I played very little football since, even though I can, and I wanted to make sure I have the skill set to do that. But
contact is rowdy.
Pistols are scary. They don't have to be scary though. That's what we're also saying. Regressions. Yes, there are ways to build confidence with it. There's a big truck coming by, so hopefully that's not too loud. But that's one of my other concepts I talk about real quick is again, in that assessment, we're looking at competence. Are you competent in that movement? That's where we can do this virtual screen. And then we go from competence to confidence. And again, you kind of had enough confidence to try it. And then if we had said, and again, as a coach, and that's where I say, hey, I want us to both have the confidence before we say, let's go to that. And then the capacity is that third part for sure. So competence, confidence, and capacity. And then that's the question I want to throw back to you before we wrap up here is how do you define fitness or athleticism or however we want to go down that path? But fitness is the one word I guess I'll ask you to define.
Yeah, I think that's more of just kind of an open concept. I think it's honestly the definition of fitness is what you just described, right? With anything, you need to be able to be competent and then confident and then have the capacity to do it. And then the application goes to anything, right? Because ultimately fitness comes to generating capacity in multiple different sense. For someone who's an endurance athlete, they're thinking fitness as aerobic capacity. Can I go further? Can I go faster? Can I go longer? So on and so forth. Whereas someone who is thinking fitness from a weightlifting standpoint, can my capacity of strength
lift the most weight possible?
Exactly,
at least 2 or 3 moves. Yeah.
Exactly. And then for fitness, when you're talking about like a team sport, just going back to soccer, right? Like you need to be able to run, but yet you also have the strength to be able to fight off an opponent or whatever else. So honestly, I think the best definition is what you just described, is having that scaled ability to drive those things going forward. Because when you get into new sports and new activities, then you generate a new form of competency that you then have to then regenerate and build. So it's always dynamic and always kind of ever changing and moving forward, hopefully.
Love it. We're going to wrap up there. Tell folks where they can find you.
So my practice is Live Loud. So it's liveloudlife.com. The Instagram handle is live.loud.life. Those are the two main areas. And then YouTube page, you just do Live Loud Life, you should be able to find us. Although if you do Live Loud Chiropractic, you're going to get on YouTube, you're just going to get all the trashy chiropractors that mic people up, and it's just loud chiropractic adjustments. So I would actually just go to the website and then try to find our YouTube page where we have various videos and whatnot.
Thank you, Rosin, for watching there. Appreciate you. Hopefully we can catch up soon. And thank you, Dr. Antonio.
Thank you.
Groulet. Like Buble-ish.
Yeah,
Not really, but Groulet. That's how I'll remember. Anyway, we'll see you guys next time. And hit you up and boom. How do I end this one? I don't know. Oh, end there.